Hello, Damon.
Hello, Jeremy.
How's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
Good, good. It is suddenly summer here, and I saw my first inner tuber yesterday.
Mm.
I don't know if you have inner tubers in your neck of the woods, but here in Montana, we're kind of lousy with rivers. It's really warm, and you can't do a lot of normal stuff like go inside a restaurant or go to a concert or have a potluck or even go to the farmer's market in a normal way. And something you still can do at a pretty good social distance is float down the river in an inflated tire tube. Is this something you have ever done? Do you know this genre of sport?
I have floated many a river in my day.
Awesome. So I wanted to talk to you about inner tube philosophy because the inner tube that I saw reminded me of several kind of heady conclusions I have come to in my river tubing experience. And I guess the first is about control. So you plop your butt down on this piece of rubber inflated in air with a hole in the middle for your butt, and you float down the river. And control is, I guess, illusory. You spend a lot of time adjusting, kind of like, I want to face forward, or I want to paddle over and be closer to my friends and my family I'm floating with. But for the most part, you are really going with the flow. And even these pretty minor adjustments take a lot of effort. And I guess I'm wondering if that's like a good thing or a bad thing as a larger practice. You know, going through life, going with the flow, obviously it's something we extol, but also loss of control, lack of control is terrifying. And it kind of gets bigger and bigger because it makes me think, gosh, is everything I do, even my biggest steps, pretty much these little doggy paddles that might turn me for a few seconds before I get spun back, or these desperate paddles to get closer to someone, but then we'll get distanced again just because they happen to be slightly differently inflated or a side current takes them in a different way. And it makes me wonder, just, do we have control in our life? You know, we do things, but are we really on a tube that is floating down a larger river, and where we got in, where we get out, where it takes us, who we bump into is a lot less within our scope of action than we think. And what we do is like 1% of the experiences we have, and the river, or just the circumstances we are plopped into, is so much more dominant.
When you say terrifying, it makes me think about a phrase that probably many people in, I would call myself, middle age, have heard when they were younger, which was, you can do or be anything you want in life. All you have to do is work hard and go after it. And I actually always found that to be slightly terrifying, because if that's true, how do you limit, number one, the possibilities? And how do you stay connected and committed to the thing that you're doing? And then finally, to maybe more circling around what you're probing, how do you accept if you went after something that you were told you could be with hard work? How do you accept if that doesn't come to fruition? And fast forward to my current occupation, I would say I use this more when I'm working with teens and kind of young adults. But I bring this very imagery into our conversations. There's a current that you're riding. You have some control to try to steer between the banks. But when you attempt to try to go upstream or to exhibit pinpoint precision with every move, you inevitably are going to find yourself incapable of doing that. And is that your own personal failure, or is that the failure to understand the scope of the actual situation?
So, which is it? What's the answer?
When you think about random and sometimes fleeting, and even the things that we've done successfully in life, when you think about all the things that had to line up and we had to stick the landing under pressure when it mattered, when the influencer was watching, I mean, it's hard not to think that there are so many forces outside of our control. And I'll come back to my first thing. Can we really do and be anything that we want? Because to me, that's where it all starts. If you already consider the destination before you start the journey, having no knowledge of what the journey holds, it seems pretty egocentric and short-sighted to think that you have all the required skills to maneuver and to manifest and to overcome to be able to make it to that specific spot that you had set out for yourself. So I think that the current is real. I think our dog paddling is probably also true on a lot of levels. And maybe I'll just extend it out a little bit farther and say, what is it all about? Is it about getting somewhere? I mean, it's cliche, but what is it all about? And if it's about getting somewhere, it seems like a race towards the finish is cheating ourselves from enjoying the actual float in the first place.
And what is the finish, too? I mean, you talk about nailing things, you talk about excelling, you talk about being recognized. And if you fail, if you're unseen, if you're unrecognized, you kind of have the same ending, which is, of course, death. And I don't mean to get so dark so early in our conversation, but that ride is maybe more equivalent than we think. And the path is quite similar from person to person, whether you're famous and quote unquote successful or the opposite.
You know, I think if you live by your values, then you can be successful right now. And I see this the same way, that if we reframe the game, or if we play a game inside the game where we are more in control of the rules, in the sense that if we show up, if we put the effort that we feel represents us, if we sort of stay true to our own value set, if we are capable of not allowing our nervous systems to be hijacked, if we love and stay connected, if we embrace the human experience, then we win. And I saw that early in life traveling in predominantly Buddhist countries, where I saw a tremendous amount of contentment from people who seemingly should have felt like they were getting the shaft, or that they were on the bottom rung or bottom tier of society. And that's not true here. Here, it's if you're on the bottom rung or the bottom tier, it's either a personal affront that that person was lazy or not skilled, etc., or from that person's perspective, that their elevation was required to heal some of the wounds. And I always found that really fascinating. How is it that this person who's laying on the street can have a smile that looked so content? And I really do believe that what I stumbled on when I was, in my mid-20s was that, wow, they're playing a different game. They aren't floating the river to get somewhere in particular. They are within a Buddhist philosophy or spirituality, embracing their karmic path, which changes the way they fundamentally saw themselves. Whereas in our capitalistic system, it's you can be anything you want, rags to riches type stuff. So I sensed a lot more contentment. I felt like, wow, it was eye-opening and liberating. to think about that.
You just raised two really big questions with that for me. And one is, how do you choose between contentment, which I think is lower expectations, and success in the Western sense that you're talking about, which is higher expectations and higher pressure. And I think we usually extol expectations. And at the same time, maybe they're just punishing, or even more dire, delusional. And we're on the path we're on the tube, and we're on the river. And why put a fancy hat on that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but what are we owed and what are we guaranteed? I mean, nothing as far as I'm concerned. And when we have these expectations that seem to be just around the corner, or we lose track of our own mortality, that can bring a sense of being and feeling discontented with what situation we're in. So I think coming back to the present moment and understanding that we aren't guaranteed anything more is a real liberation. So I guess that's my first thought on how to mitigate some of that forward thinking and planning to the extent where we're forgetting about now, and we're forgetting that there's no guarantee for the next moment, the next day.
There's a philosophy, or at least saying, have your second child first. And the idea is the second child, parents are a lot more chill. They kind of go with the flow more. They're not reading up on everything. They're just trying to be with the situation as it is. And I definitely find that even in tubing, where I'm fussing, I'm moving around, I'm adjusting, I'm flapping my hands to get in the position I want, I'm moving my hat to get with the sun. And it takes me, maybe 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way, maybe all the way down before I relax, sit into it, lean back, and just be in the situation. And it's like, oh, I should have been like this the whole time. And you're making me think, obviously, that extends to life. Have your second tube trip first, or your second hour of tubing first. And, that's a lot to take in, even just thinking, gosh, how much judgment do I put? How much strictures do I put? How many expectations do I put every day? And then I have these brief moments of being like, oh, yeah, this is kind of nice if I don't fight it.
And that same checklist that you just rattled off, what does it feel like in my body? In that first hour, there's a lot of tension in your body. There's some activation of your limbic system where you're a little bit more heightened, and that doesn't feel good. And that's not a good baseline. That's not a good place to perform from, honestly. It's counterintuitive to say, but this is true. We perform our best when we're alert and calm. Alert and calm. Imagine being in the tube, calm but alert. And those things are hard to reconcile, because when you're alert, it typically will slide pretty quickly into being hyper alert. And once we're hyper alert, we're on the lookout, we're overriding the normal reaction that we would have, and our system is a little bit more activated, which then the snowball effect is pretty clear physiologically. We start to dump cortisol in our system. There's more inflammation. Our heart rate rises, our blood pressure goes up, our vision narrows, our blood goes to the more vital parts on our body. And all of those things happen in a subtle way when we are trying to kind of force ourselves to make it right, to make it the way it's supposed to be in my head. So that last hour of tubing, that second child mentality, can be really effective. You can sort of think of this as more in the practice zone, where, let's just say, for example, you were going to go tubing, and you before you started, you said, I'm going to practice trying to just be alert and calm the whole time. So now what changed?
Intention.
intention, expectation,
Yeah.
perception. And I'll make the argument that when we shift our focus towards those things, we actually have more fun. We are in control.
Tell me what you mean by in control, because I thought it was the opposite. It's saying I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to be effortful. And I guess that was my second strand, so maybe these are kind of joining. Like, when do you paddle, if ever, and how do you know when the right sort of occasion is to put out effort and try to go, 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 and when to let yourself go into where you're being taken, if that makes sense?
It does. And I mean, I'll use kind of a sports cliche in sports psychology, but it's, trust your stuff. If you have the skills, which, when you're tubing down a river, you don't really need to amass a lot of skills to be able to successfully float a river. But by trusting your stuff, you're staying alert and calm until there's a need to make a change, to make a move. It doesn't mean alert and calm doesn't mean daydreaming. It doesn't mean that you're not assessing the situation. It's the opposite of that. It means you're very aware and attuned to the current, the wind, your surroundings, any rocks that might be in your upcoming 100 yards or so. You're very attuned to those things, but you're calmly attuned. And by being calmly attuned to those things, that is what I mean by control. You're in control of your nervous system. You're in control of the meta or the big picture, and you're allowing yourself to make improvisational moves within that structure. And that is really a good example of the game inside the game. So you've put a fence around what the experience means for you on a level where how do I want to show up for my float? I want to show up alert and calm. And that doesn't mean that rock coming at you isn't something you get out of the way of, but you can do it in a way that's more alert and calm. And frankly, when you get around the rock, you can come back to being alert and calm because it's no longer a dangerous moment, for example. So these micro adjustments happen more intentionally and they happen more efficiently when we have sort of set the conditions for how we want to be for the float.
You're making me think that the guideline is to be found internally more than externally. And by that, I actually mean like physiologically in my body more than in what a video camera would record of my actions or my demeanor. And so if I am trying really hard, but with an inner calm and enjoyment and attention, then I'm still going with the flow, I think. or it's an effort that is enjoyable or positive or exciting and discovery. And if I'm trying really hard and the strain is because I'm afraid or I'm uncomfortable or I feel like I'm behind or anything else, then that's more punishing. And I don't know if punishing and relaxed are good or bad in some cosmic sense, but certainly experientially. Is there a way we can take our internal temperature to know I'm doing this right? Whatever we're doing, whether it's chilling or whether it's stressing, you can, if it's internal, yeah. How do I know?
Yeah, I think you're onto something here. And when we have an internal locus of control, then no matter what happens externally, we feel that we have the capability to respond in a way that matches our values, our intention, etc. And one simple way is to develop a more sophisticated ability to feel what's happening inside our own body. The phrase for that is interoception. where we have more of a sense. So just to give you an example, and we'll put this survey in the show notes, but there's a pretty robust assessment around measuring our awareness, not only of what we feel inside of our body, but then how we react after the realization of said feeling. So let's say that you are floating the river and you feel a tightness in your shoulders. If your interoception is on a lower scale, you're not going to notice that your shoulders are tense and they have risen. But if they do, your nervous system will notice. And so your brain now is going to reassess the situation, and it's going to say, hey, this is a little bit more dicey maybe than we thought. We need to be more engaged. So let's kind of batten down the hatches and put this body into a fight or flight state. But if you can cultivate the awareness in real-ish time, you now say to yourself, oh, wow, I just recognize that my shoulders have risen and they're tight and tense. Now I can relax them. I can take a breath. I can do a quick body scan and see if there's anything else that I feel. And basically by doing that, you are training your brain to not take the bait. And you're also training yourself to allow your body to be a litmus for maybe some deeper sensations that are going on. And that is a real skill that
I was going to say, that's so hard. I feel like that is the real kung fu. I mean, I know, like, on a computer, I'm in something. I realize I'm hunched and I know I should take a break. But because I'm hunched, I don't want to take a break. I'm like locked in and I'm kind of get attached to being stiff and sore. And I have routines and I have practices I have timers that go off that I stretch during. And I have lunchtime routines that involve stretching and exercise, and morning routines and evening routines often. But in the midst of it, in the moment when I'm tight, it's not pleasant, but it's like, I just need to keep going through it. It's sort of the attitude that gets embodied by that body position. So how do you fold that umbrella once it's popped out? It's like, it's raining. It's like, well, it isn't. You just got to close up. But how do you detense when you're tense?
I mean, you have to do the foundational work on the front end, and you have to buy in. It's a cutesy thing to say, change the game, reframe the game. But your scenario is exactly what it's for, and it's what it means. By reframing the game, I realize that when I'm hunched and tense and I notice it, that I am now prioritizing detangling, decoupling, unhooking from and allowing my body to create a little bit more of an energetic flow for 1 to 2 or 3 minutes, even when I'm cranking something that feels so important that I need to get this thing done, because I've bought into the fact that by doing so, by taking that 1 to 3 minute break, not when my timer goes off, because that's telling me when to do it. This is you in real time realizing that it's required. It's needed right now. By doing so, by actively prioritizing that, I'm living a different life. I've changed something fundamental. It's not that I'm pampering myself. It's that I have bought into the idea that by making these small adjustments, when they appear in my awareness, I'm valuing my ability to recognize and listen to what's going on inside of my body. And my body will reward me with that by relaxing. And again, we know we perform our best when we're relaxed. And so if I can, even use the selfishness card to say, during that hunch, if I remember to relax and to take that 1 to 3 minutes, whatever it is that I'm going to produce in the next 5 minutes to a half hour is going to be quantitatively better than if I just, grinded it out or powered through.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick that moment is playing on me, because it's saying you have to just finish this and then take the break. Just see it through. And what's funny is, at a task level, but even on a thought level, something new is always there to be done. You're never actually finished. And there's this constant illusion that, okay, if I finish this, I can relax. And there are clearly stopping points and things you can check off and say, okay, this is the time I can take my break. But something else keeps coming up. And I know at the end of the day, it can be like, gosh, what didn't I get done? Can be such a punishing thing too. So what you're saying is, if you recognize that you're tight, get up, take the breaths, do the stretch, look out the window or equivalent. And that is part of your real life too. And whatever work you do is also going to be faster, more productive, higher quality as a result.
Exactly. And what you're doing is you're practicing state management. And there are books and books around time management and stress management. But state management is what you're talking about now. It's recognizing what state you're in and managing it, and understanding that has a profound effect on how you show up in what you can produce. Aikido, the martial art of Aikido, they have a really powerful practice called centering. And this is something that I learned in my sports psychology training as well. But instead of holding awareness in our head, we learn and we're trained to bring awareness down to our center. So somewhere roughly around your belly button. And in any activity that you're performing, let's say it's a sports endeavor, or let's say you're going to be walking into the boardroom to pitch a really important project. In the philosophy of Aikido and in sports psychology, and in the spirit of this conversation we're having right now, before going into that moment, you learn how to drop your awareness down into your center, so that you're literally walking into whatever high performance experience that you're in, not trapped between your ears, but from your center. And one activity that I've heard of based on that philosophy as a way to make the point is, you have a group of people on one side of a room, and their goal is to make it to the other side of the room. That's the goal, is to get somewhere. And that's what they want to be focused on. And meanwhile, they have a partner, but in this case, their partner is also somewhat of a foil. They're kind of there to get in their way. And you are to sort of recognize what kind of thoughts that you're having and what it's doing to your state, as your foil is also snapping their fingers somewhere around your forehead. So they're also encouraging you to keep your awareness in your head. So that's round one. Round two is try to get there at all costs, no matter what. And the foil is equally, pesky. And then the final round is to drop down into your center and forget about getting there, but really train your attention just on your center, so that every step you take, you're really just at your own center. And when I say the foil is basically putting their arm around chest level and trying to, in some capacity, use their own strength to keep you from moving forward. And study after study, experience after experience, the people who drop down into their center and keep their focus and train their attention on that center, even though they're taking their steps, are significantly more powerful and capable of getting to the other side of the room anyway.
Wow. I love this. I haven't heard of this. This is great. So, is it ever okay to be grinding? Or should I have a ironclad rule that if I notice myself tensed up, if I notice myself straining, I should stop and take that break? Or are there occasions where I should see it through to the finish? It seems ironic to have an ironclad rule about relaxing, but I feel like I kind of want even sharper clarity on this.
Right. I don't think it's ironclad. I think that if you are grinding, I mean, it could be a physical feat that you need to continue to push towards. And in that case, you can grind and be calm at the same time. It's possible. So if you've set your intention and, you're free soloing El Cap, obviously there's no option. But this is more sneaky, where it's you're grinding on one hand by trying to finish the task or the project, but you're turning yourself into a pretzel in the midst of it and you don't realize it. That's what I'm talking about. Becoming more aware of that part of your physiology. We have more control over our biology than we think. And when at all possible, we should exercise that control unless, as my example stated, there's, some need to continue to press on at all costs.
And I think these finish lines are illusions often. I mean, we have the micro task and it's like just 5 minutes more, but it's a string of those, as I said. And then it's like, gosh, I spent all day in a pretzel. And then it's like, gosh, I spent the last month in a pretzel. And then it's like, gosh, I spent the last 5 years in this job as a pretzel. And it's usually some kind of breakdown, mental or physical or both, that leads to realizing, gosh, I need to change how I want to be, including just posturally how I want to be, even if I'm going to do some of the same work.
That's absolutely right. And the more time spent in a pretzel, the less you're capable of coming to this conclusion or having some clarity around what you really feel and what's really going on around you. Once we are in that pretzel, everything around us looks different. You notice that when you're stressed, it just seems like even the tasks that typically you don't love, but you can navigate, everything seems harder when you're stressed. And so if you're in a pretzel for 5 years, I mean, that is going to affect you on a profound level. And it gets harder and harder to understand that it's become your new normal. And as you say, usually we don't make changes until pain forces us to. And then we have to do a lot of work just to sort of get back to baseline. And so what I'm suggesting is, instead of living in that pretzel type of space and mentality, mindset, physiology, and continuing to tumble and topple, why don't we stay in control from moment to moment, so that there's a relative amount of consistency and that we never get ourselves too caught down in that cavern.
Interoception, was that the word?
Right, yes.
So, yeah, put those antennae up is something I think I'm going to try to do, because, okay, yes, there are those big pushes where it's like, yeah, spend these 5 minutes, or maybe this all-nighter, or even this 5-day stretch, or 5-week stretch, maybe, pushing so hard. But if that's the norm, if that's something that's happening multiple times a day on a regular day, then check in with that, check out on that. I mean, I think it's going to happen multiple times a day, every day. Right. I shouldn't set my standards too high, but I think the ratio, like, should it be I pretzel for 3 hours and I take a 5-minute break? Should it be I pretzel for 20 minutes and I take a 5-minute break? Should it be I'm pretty good for 20 minutes and then I pretzel for 5 minutes? Or I'm pretty good for 3 hours and then I pretzel for 5 minutes? I think there's not a right answer is what I'm getting from you, but if I have that interoception, I'll at least know what my actual lived experience is.
Pretty much, yeah. Again, this is definitely personal, but I do like the way you frame that. It's not that we're avoiding being a pretzel at all costs. It's that we're mindfully being a pretzel, and and we're allowing ourselves to an allotted time in that space, in that state. And the other byproduct of cultivating a more keen sense of interoception is, as I said already, you're making these adjustments on the fly to allow yourself not to get hijacked. But also it's sending a deeper signal that is more around self-compassion. And when we elect to care about ourselves more, about our genuine health and well-being, then that starts to snowball, and we start to have more honest conversations with ourselves about how long we can pretzel before it starts to really affect us on a performance level, on a mental health level, on a physiological level. But we're cultivating the conditions to be more self-compassionate. And if you're anything like any other human being in the world, you're pretty hard on yourself. And for us to be able to tack against that is also a really, really important byproduct for cultivating this awareness in the first place.
I feel like there's a whole math of shapes. And I don't know what the morphology of an inner tube is compared to a pretzel. They may be equivalent for all I know. But I want to shift back to the river and kind of connect these two. And that is, I've had this experience and I've just tried it several different ways of being on the tube and doing nothing. And you go slow, you get stuck, you get fast, you bump into rocks, but you get to the same endpoint within a relatively same amount of time. And the trade-off for the lack of control is a pretty deep presence to each particular moment and a total dropping of kind of judgment of how well you're doing. And then at the other extreme, there's, trading the tube for a kayak and trying to navigate, each particular point and do fancy moves and slide in and out of eddies and ride the edges of waves. And I think that's super rewarding too. So I'm not sure which of those or if any of those is the kind of pretzeling, but the this isn't feeling good. I want to be in the right position. I'm in the wrong position or I'm in the wrong place. And that kind of paddling, which isn't as effective as kayaking or nearly as relaxing as totally free tubing, I think that's a tough state. And maybe again, with that interoception, it's tuning in to how much am I doing this sort of doggy paddling that isn't actually controlling where I go very much, but is affecting a lot my experience of wherever I am.
I love that. And I feel like the advancement when you're more attuned from an interoception perspective, that you can use that analogy, that you're going from an inner tube to a kayak. You're able to come in and out of eddies. You're able to make quicker shifting on the dime because you have more tools. You've refined your vessel. And so really there is value in doing nothing and understanding that on the whole, we probably grip too tight. But there is also, and I think this is where the shift happens into more kind of peak performance, where you have literally up-leveled your vessel and you've put a paddle in your hand that has these really, well-crafted oars, and your boat is streamlined and it's light and it's got some ability to have maybe a fin underneath it. And so you can now explore things in a way that you couldn't when you were dog paddling. And to me, that's a really good one. I'm going to use that as a story or as a teaching imagery, because that's really what it boils down to. You're upping your game with more tools in the moment to be able to potentially take riskier moves, make riskier decisions. With a higher level of confidence, you'll be able to navigate them.
And I'm looking at it, or imagining looking at it from the highest top level view, the view from space. And either way, the sort of river is the same. And some dots going from one end of it to the other, whether there's a lot of splashing, whether there's total relaxation, whether there's this deft use of tools and efforts. So it doesn't make it not meaningful or different in your different experiences, but kind of fighting where you are and not embracing whatever you have at hand, it does seem so punishing in the karmic sense that you referenced earlier in the show.
It's a really important part of it as well. It's just overall perspective. And this is where I think mindfulness practice comes in handy, where we can split from subject and object, see ourselves a little bit more objectively, and realize that we are just a dot going down a river. And so I guess I'll come full circle with the phrase that has annoyed me so much about you can be anything that you want. Maybe what it really refers to in kind of a liberating way is that you can choose to be in any given moment anything you want. And I think that that slight shift in how it's seen is maybe at the end of the day what liberation really does look like, and success and freedom that we were all told as young people was the aim. And I just think that on the whole, we were told that those freedoms and successes were going to be something external. And in my judgment, that's backwards. It's missing the point. We can be liberated and free internally, and we can choose to be a certain way that feels authentic and genuine, whether we're in a kayak or a tube, or whether the rapids are fast or slow, whether they're giant boulders or just a trickling creek.
It reminds me, I read a funny thing by a kayaker about going off these giant tall descents, going down 100-foot waterfalls, and how that was so amazing to people in the field. And then a tuber did it. And the idea was just like, yeah, or you could just fall. And he was like, think about Niagara Falls. Like, you go over in a kayak, sure, but like people go over in a barrel, and they've done it 100 years ago. So either way, you're going down, and maybe let go is the way to grasp the true essence of it. Float us home. How would you close this conversation and orient our minds or our butts if we're in a tube? Where should we get up, or we're in a pretzel? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I guess I'll turn to the audience right now and ask you to do a quick scan. Have you been sitting hunched over? Are your feet on the ground? Is one leg up, one leg down? Is your position unstable? And let's take a few seconds and think about awareness, where your attention is generally placed. And for most of us, that's between our ears. So I just want to ask you to see if you can drop down and just literally feel your awareness, your camera that is your compass that helps you navigate. See if you can move that through your face, down your neck, through your chest, down towards your belly and your belly button, and just absorb the words I'm saying from a new perspective within your own body. See if you can spend a minute See if you can remember to practice this exercise, and see if you can become more connected to what it is that your body and your bodily sensations are telling you. And trust that when you do that, you will still be processing information. You'll still be capable of manufacturing what it is that you need to manufacture. So in essence, trust your stuff.
I love it. My belly button is the tube
Right.
I've got with me all the time. I guess it makes sense. We came from a tube, and we've got one with us. Thank you so much, Damon. Thank you all for listening, and we're excited to see you next time for another episode of Stimulus and Response.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, Jeremy. Stimulus and Response is hosted by Damon Valentino and Jeremy N. Smith and produced by Matt Mullins at Black Rooster Productions. Please rate, review, and share the show. And please join us next time for another stimulating exploration of the best parts and best ways of being human and being alive.